that Ukraine would never buy or maintain or otherwise own nuclear weapons.
It was the first document about security guarantees or insurance.
Russia's role really was trying to position itself as the only successor to the Soviet Union.
For the first 2 months after Minsk 1,000 people were killed.
What pressure do you think would work best on Russia?
Nuclear weapon. Вітаю. Сьогодні ми поговоримо про мирні перемовини.
Today we will talk about the peace negotiations between Ukraine, the United States and Russia. In the coming days we will have such dates as the 12th anniversary of the start of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine and the first anniversary of the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Against the backdrop of these dates, peace negotiations are taking place between the Ukrainian, American and Russian sides.
Українською стороною, американською стороною, російською стороною щодо завершення війни. І ми спробуємо
We will talk about how the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia have been going over the past 12 years, what went wrong, why they did not lead to peace, and whether the situation will change during these negotiations. Will the Ukraine-US-Russia talks lead us to peace?
Ці перемовини в форматі Україна, США, Росія привести нас до миру. Вітаю, Ізаку.
Вітаю, Анна.
Today, let's talk about these negotiations between Ukraine, USA, and Russia. But it seems too important to begin with Budapest Memorandum. There were a lot of different discussions about this Budapest Memorandum, but it was maybe the first document between Ukraine and Russia about security guarantees. You know that this document was signed in 1994 by Kuchma from Ukraine side, by Yeltsin from Russia side, by Major from Great Britain side, and by Clinton from American side. Later China supported this document and France. So why did Ukraine make this decision to reject from nuclear weapon, and why we needed security guarantors at those time, and in which roles during these negotiations, during signing of this memorandum, in which roles were Ukraine, Russia, USA, and Great Britain?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, like you say, there's a lot of things are said now about the Budapest Memorandum. It's quite well known. And the headline that everyone remembers is that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons that were left on its territory after the end of the Soviet Union, and in return got no security guarantees, really, nothing that protected Ukraine in 2014, 2022, or even earlier, like we'll discuss. But there were good reasons for Ukraine to make this decision. So yeah, going back to the end of the 1980s, the early 1990s, and the Soviet Union starts to disintegrate, and nuclear weapons were left in Ukraine and Belarus and Kazakhstan. And the majority of these, and Russia, of course, and the majority of these were in Ukraine. And this was really a priority issue for Russia and for America, the two kind of main nuclear superpowers, to remove these other new nuclear states from the map, so that it would remain just the 5 kind of known ones plus India and Israel unofficially. So the signatories to this nuclear non-proliferation treaty, so that's the ones who essentially signed this Budapest Memorandum: Britain, America, France, China, Russia. So the reasons why Ukraine kind of agreed to this, to give up this very important strategic weapon, there were quite a few. The first really came from within Ukraine, as far as I can tell. It was a part of the narrative of independence coming from Chernobyl, this idea that Moscow had come to Ukraine, had brought these dangerous chemicals, had damaged the country, damaged the people, and lied about it. And so there was a strong kind of anti-nuclear part of the Ukrainian independence movement. So that in the 1990 Declaration of State Sovereignty from Ukraine, Article 9 included these 3 nuclear-free principles: that Ukraine would never buy or maintain or otherwise own nuclear weapons. So there was a movement from within Ukraine to have this nuclear-free status. But there were also technical reasons. It was very difficult to, Ukraine didn't have all of the technology or all of the skills to maintain these nuclear weapons. They were controlled by Moscow. It maybe would have been possible to bring them under control of Kyiv, but difficult and expensive. And also, these nuclear weapons really were made for launching at Western Europe or America. So they were intercontinental ballistic missiles that had a range of 10,000 kilometers or more. So to hit Vladivostok, but maybe not Moscow, it's not so useful for Ukraine's defense. Economic reasons, everybody knows in the 1990s, Ukraine's economy was not great and very expensive to maintain these weapons. And geopolitical reasons too, because to become part of the world order, really, to become part of this international community, it was a requirement for Ukraine to give up these nuclear weapons, to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is really what the Budapest Memorandum was. It was Ukraine becoming part of this Non-Proliferation Treaty, nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So, and this would open up economic support for Ukraine. It would allow, agreements with Russia and America particularly. So it was really a situation where Ukraine didn't have much choice. It couldn't have continued to have these nuclear weapons because it was impossible for Russia or America to accept. So then you kind of get these roles emerging where Ukraine's role, it really tried to position itself as somewhat of an equal to Russia, as both as successors to the Soviet Union, so that these nuclear weapons were Ukraine's and they would choose to give them up, to choose to destroy them. Whereas Russia's role really was trying to position itself as the only successor to the Soviet Union. So the only one who could have nuclear weapons, the only one who had a position on the UN Security Council and so on. So that Ukraine was in some way a new country and Russia was just the Soviet Union in a different form. And America's role also as a nuclear superpower and really as a part of this non-proliferation treaty was trying to make sure that no new nations entered this club of nuclear superpowers, because the more there are, the less powerful each one is. So the process of this negotiations really was initially bilateral between Ukraine and Russia, and Russia was trying to get Ukraine to destroy these weapons, and Ukraine, they couldn't reach agreements on how it would be done, on compensation, and that's when America starts to enter these negotiations. They become trilateral, and America starts to offer money, really, to solve these problems. So money to pay for the destruction of these weapons, to pay Russia for this, to pay Russia for converting the highly enriched uranium in the warheads down to something that could be used in nuclear power stations. And through this, Ukraine gets compensation for the highly enriched uranium. It gets made to low enriched and used in nuclear fuel rods. So America starts to kind of help to unstick these negotiations, really. And Britain's role was not part of the negotiations at all. It was just as a signatory, because Britain, America, and the Soviet Union, which became illegally speaking, became Russia. These were the three legal depositories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means they were the ones who could decide who would join, who would leave, and so on. So so that's kind of how we get to this position of these signatories. Ukraine, it had really, the demands were about compensation and the costs of destroying, which America covers, but they were also about security guarantees, because nuclear weapons were a security guarantee in a form, and to give them up, they want something to replace it. And America was refusing to give anything other than security assurances, which is simply that America won't attack and that it will consult about other breaches of this. And so America insisted on this, Britain signed the same document, and so did Russia. So there were no guarantees of Ukraine's security, only promises that each state would not attack Ukraine, would respect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. But Ukraine really wasn't in a position to achieve much more. It was relatively weak, compared to America and Russia at this point, and was kind of forced to sign. Ukraine negotiated hard, but America would not give real security guarantees, even till today.
Yeah, and it was the first document about security guarantees or insurance, yes, where parties who signed this memorandum committed that they respect borders of Ukraine, its sovereignty, and they promised not to use force or threats of force, not military, not economic, not trade, any other pressure on Ukraine. And what we saw in reality, yes, expectations that we are defended, we are protected, but in reality, what we received in the background of these negotiations about giving up of Ukraine from nuclear weapons, yes, we had a gas war of Russia against Ukraine, 1993-1994. Then, after signing of this memorandum, we again had different wars of Russia against Ukraine. I meant gas wars, 1997, then 2005, 2006, and later, and trade wars, also cheese war, chocolate war, different obstacles in export of Ukraine goods to Russia. So Russia began to violate its commitments, and immediately after signing of it. And at least in 2014, Russia did military invasion in Ukraine, and since this time we had huge numbers of negotiations, talks with Russia. But every time, Russia violates these agreements. I think it's important to remember all these agreements with Russia and what expectations were and what results were. Let's briefly to talk about it. Begin from the Minsk one, yes. Maybe even earlier. I think that we should to remember even this Geneva statement, which was happened in spring 2014 after military invasion Russia in Ukraine. Parties of this statement were USA, European Union, Ukraine and Russia. It was about the escalation situation in the east of Ukraine, but what we had, Russia continued its invasion. Then we had first meeting on the high level, on the level of presidents of Ukraine and Russia. It was the day before the inauguration Petro Poroshenko. It was in Normandy in France, the first meeting, and parties agreed about negotiations. But after this meeting, in summer 2014, we had a new stage of escalation. Pro-Russian forces shut down airplane of Malaysian airlines, MH17. Almost 300 people died. Then regular troops of Russia came to Ukraine. We had Ilovaisk tragedy in the end of August 2014. After this, after Ilovaisk, there was a new negotiations between Poroshenko, Putin by phone, and it seems to me that on the 3rd of September, Putin said that he seemed that he has a very close vision of resolving conflict, very closer to Poroshenko vision. So, and there were positive expectations. We had Minsk, we received Minsk 1, and after that, fighting for Donetsk airport continued. According to United Nations report, for the first 2 months after Minsk 1,000 people were killed. And it shows that Russia didn't execute this agreement. And after this, in the beginning of 2015, we had Minsk 2, and signing of Minsk 2 were in the ground of fighting for the Baltseva, and in a couple of days after signing Minsk 2, Russian army took control under the Baltseva. So it's again about that Russia didn't execute its agreements. During this 12 years, we had a large numbers of meetings, talkings, negotiations, in different formats, yes, and on different levels, on the level of leaders, on the level of advisors, on the level of foreign ministers, on the level of foreign working groups, in different places, in Minsk, in Berlin, in Paris, with in different formats between first Poroshenko and Putin, then Zelensky and Putin. There was one meeting. From Germany, there was Angela Merkel, now Merz. Between them, there was talkings between Scholz and Putin. From France side, from French side, it was Hollande, then Macron. From America, in America, several presidents were changed during these years. Only Putin is eternal. Yes, and different formats, different levels, different documents, Geneva Statement, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, different formulas, Formula Steinmeier, Zelensky peace formula, now Trump's peace plan. And Isaac, on your opinion, what is wrong with all these all these meetings, all these negotiations, maybe not correct place, or papers on which these documents were printed, or peoples or participants. What a problem is?
I think you touched on it. Only Putin remains, and I think even it's bigger than Putin. It's a Russian mentality that means that negotiations are not for resolving the conflict, it's for continuing, really. Agreements are not to be followed, but to be reversed when it suits Russia. So the agreements themselves are good in theory, right? So we have, everybody can agree that in theory, if we sign this, it will work, the conflict will gradually resolve. But in reality, it's not followed. And like you mentioned, every time it was not followed really by the Russian side, to break the ceasefires, to forget about or to completely ignore security assurances from the Budapest Memorandum, to ignore the ceasefires from Minsk I and Minsk II. And so, yeah, I think we can really see that the problem is the fact that Russia does not respect these agreements that are signed, regardless of where they're signed or who they're signed with. And I think it's a problem we're still facing today with the ongoing negotiations. But the key thing is that from all of these lessons from 1994 onwards, Ukraine has learned this. Ukraine has learned that it's not enough just to trust that Russia will follow its words. And that's why negotiations now especially are so complicated, to figure out a way to force Russia to follow these words. What do you think? Do you think there's a way maybe that Russia could, that Ukraine could trust that Russia will commit to what it promises?
Yes, we can't trust Russia, of course, and just how we can be sure that this time negotiations will be successful? Yes, because this time we see that there were meetings in Arab Emirates, then in Saudi Arabia, and before these meetings, and during these meetings, and after these meetings, we saw massive attacks of Russia on Ukrainian energetic infrastructure. Yes, you are now here in Kyiv, and how do you feel this effect from these negotiations?
I think, yeah, Russia gives its answer with bombs more than with words. But I agree, and I think there are a lot of these examples of the reality on the battlefield, or now even the reality in civilian life, and the negotiations, and we look at them side by side. But I also think that we can sometimes overanalyze how this is a kind of Russian negotiating tactic. I think really it's just they're often not connected, perhaps, or not so closely connected, negotiations and battlefield. Russia attacks continuously and it negotiates continuously, and these things overlap. Clearly Putin does not say to stop attacking. I think he allows the military to continue with its plans, and sometimes these plans are at the same time as negotiations, sometimes they're not. I agree. I don't sleep any better knowing that, that there's negotiations in Abu Dhabi.
Well, it seems that there are two simultaneous processes, negotiations and battlefield. And sometimes Russia even strengthens its attacks before negotiations or during these negotiations, or after these negotiations. So let's try to understand what are purposes of each party of these negotiations, and what is Russian purpose, what is American purpose, what is Ukraine purpose, and are all these purposes the same or they're different, in your opinion?
They are definitely different. I think there's several consistent themes that I guess I can see. For me, Ukraine's purpose really is to find a true settlement to the war, because this conflict hurts Ukraine so much. It prevents Ukraine's future, right? As long as there's a conflict in Ukraine, as long as Russian troops are in Ukraine and the borders are disputed, it's impossible for Ukraine to move forwards into the EU, potentially one day into NATO. Ukraine needs this to be resolved, and of course, Ukraine cares about the lives of its civilians, of its soldiers. This war is very costly, whereas I think Russia really considers that it benefits from this war. So it doesn't see negotiations as a way, to end this war. It wants to freeze it somehow. All the way since 2014, to freeze this instability inside Ukraine and prevent it joining NATO or the EU, to cause division perhaps within Ukraine. It doesn't care about the costs to human lives, even economic costs. Russia is driven by an imperialist mindset that Putin sees himself in the bigger part of history. He wants to rebuild this empire. And any costs are only temporary, economic costs are only temporary, and now as the negotiations, maybe they can find a way to rebuild Russia's economy with support from America, right? And by taking Ukrainian grain, you're taking Ukrainian minerals and so on from the stolen territories. So Russia, I think, it doesn't see negotiations as a way to reasonably resolve the conflict. It sees them either as a way to achieve its maximalist aims that it cannot achieve through fighting, taking all of Donbass, stopping Ukraine's independence, its sovereignty, to gain control over Ukraine's politics, or it sees negotiations as a way to play for time, to maybe manipulate the relationship between Trump and Europe, Trump and Ukraine, to improve its position on the battlefield so that it can achieve these big aims. I guess in a word, Ukraine understands that compromise, even in Ukraine's position, compromise will be necessary, and it's made some compromises consistently. And Russia will not compromise, I think. It sees negotiations as a way to fight further.
Well, so Russia can't accept Ukrainian sovereignty, independence, yes. It perceives Ukraine as its territory, its zone of control, and can't allow to give Ukraine to choose its future itself. And in this case, Russia uses these negotiations as a leverage of achieving own purposes. And during these negotiations between America, the first America, because Russia is not willing direct negotiations with Ukraine. What are Russian purposes? Yes, the first is to maybe avoid new sanctions. and not to take responsibility for continuing this war, to show that Russia is willing to resolve this conflict, yes. So the first is to avoid new sanctions, new pressure from America, the first. Then maybe the second Russian aim is to use these negotiations as a leverage of pressure on Ukraine, to involve USA on its side, to show USA how many, to show Trump how many he will receive, to support if he supports Russian demands to Ukraine, towards Ukraine. And we saw last year, yes, we saw this 28 points plan, which were written in Moscow, and America presented this plan as their own. So this strategy works, and yes, Russia uses this negotiation as a added extra leverage pressure on Ukraine, and its main purpose toward Ukraine is capitulation of Ukraine. And Putin is sure that he can achieve it through military means. But I think that Putin is not against if he can achieve it with negotiations. So they look at these negotiations as extra leverage. We have a different vision of these negotiations and its final result. Ukraine wants to survive as independent and sovereignty state, and to provide its future sovereignty, independence through this peace negotiations and agreements. And what is USA purpose in these negotiations? On your opinion, we heard that Trump during his election campaign said that he would finish this war during 24 hours. Then he gave 100 days to Kit Kellogg to finish this war. Now there are talkings in media about striving of USA to finish this war before summer, because after that they will be busy with election campaign to Congress. So what do you think on Trump's or America's purposes? And Trump's and America purposes are the same or not?
I think now they are the same. Strategically, we all know Biden's policies were very different. Strategically, Russia is a threat to America, but Trump sees it differently. Trump sees things very personally. So like you say, he made this promise during the election campaign, so it's like a matter of pride for him to solve this war, to fulfill this promise. It's also a personal matter to win the Nobel Peace Prize. We know he's been very open about this, his desire to win that. We can talk maybe also about the economic opportunities that would come with all the peace deals and associated documents. So recently we've seen news about possibly a very large package of deals with Russia, the same with Ukraine, the minerals deal and so on. All of these things are only possible after peace. Or some end to the conflict. So that will benefit Trump's family and his close friends, and that's something that he really prioritizes. So I think there are a lot of incentives for Trump personally to pursue peace, even if it's I mean, from my perspective, it's not necessarily in America's interests. I think Trump would add to this also the idea of economically not spending money on the war. Was initially one of his main arguments to stop America funding Ukraine's defense, really. But that argument doesn't work anymore because now America makes money from this war. Europeans are paying Americans for American weapons through the Pearl Initiative. So, yeah, America, to my mind, doesn't have much to gain economically or strategically from a quick and bad for Ukraine end to this war. It really seems like Trump's personal ambition instead to me. What do you think? Is there something that America maybe could gain outside of Trump?
We see that Trump mostly support Russian ideas in these negotiations. And, we see a lot of meetings between American side and Russian side, which are not very transparent and open to society or media. And it looks like Russia tries to show Trump such kind of Russian dream, to make a lot of money together, to buy Trump's support in these negotiations. And I agree that Trump is looking for some material profit from these negotiations, which he can receive from Russia and from Ukraine after the end of all this war. But with this approach, we saw a very similar situation during Minsk I, Minsk II process, when Russia used participants of these negotiations as its supporters. So to support those who has more strength, forces. And now Russia does the same with America. And about Ukraine, I also want to add some words. That why, if we see all this, yes, why why Ukraine stays in these negotiations, yes. It seems to me that we also use these negotiations not to take responsibility for breaking this peace process, not to offend Trump, and to avoid a situation where USA can cancel sanctions against Russia and stop support of Ukraine, only those part of support which left after Trump coming to the power. So Ukraine would be happy if these negotiations will lead to peace, but at least Ukraine wants to avoid bad consequences, which could be if we don't support this peace process.
Yeah, it's funny. I think in different ways, but for similar reasons, Ukraine and Russia are both trying to demonstrate how serious they are about negotiations for Trump's approval. But in a way, the more you pretend to be serious, the closer you become to actually being serious. So it's possible that now, or in the next year, the need to continue proving how serious you are and how you're making progress actually leads to some sort of agreement, some sort of compromise that's possible. Because otherwise, with all this American pressure to make progress, eventually some agreement will have to be reached. The problem is, of course, the problem that we discussed earlier is that Russia is unlikely to stick to this agreement long term. Another thing I wanted to say when we were talking about America and money, it seems like a consistent theme through these negotiations that America understands that money, it sees the world through money in a sense, that it can pay to unlock problems. So that's really its contribution to the Budapest Memorandum, was paying for the disposal of nuclear weapons, paying for their transport, paying some compensation, and so on. It doesn't tend to use force so much to unlock these, but Russia does not care so much about money. I don't think there's any amount of money that Trump could offer, or promises of trade deals or investment and so on, that would be more important to Putin and this Russian imperialist mindset than conquering Ukraine. That seems to be the priority above everything. So I think we kind of have these different methods, perhaps. I think America, or particularly Trump, sees money as a way to unlock problems. But for Russia and for Ukraine as well, both of these issues are really beyond money. It's about fundamental things, about sovereignty and freedom and empire. And I think these are values that it's much harder to compromise on and to find a negotiated settlement.
So, Russia and the USA has different approaches, yes, to different visions how to resolve this conflict. And Russia even doesn't consider resolving. Yes, resolving for Russia is Ukraine's capitulation. So, in this case, these new negotiations, yes, in new format, in new places, with new persons, with new leaders, they can be Minsk III. There is a very good quote of Trump which reflects all these negotiations during all these years. In his interview last summer, he said that, every time I think it's going to end, he kills people. So, what element is absent in all these negotiations which don't give us to set peace? Yes, what parties of these negotiations need to add to this fifth element? Yes. What parties should add to these negotiations to lead it to peace, to make Russia execute its commitments, these agreements? Every time when we agreed these documents, something went wrong. Russia said that no, the first political conditions, only then security. Then if they agreed conditions and what should be the first, the second step, Russia said another vision of implementing these conditions. Each time we can't implement, even we have agreements, we can't implement it. And how we can make Russia to execute its commitments?
It's the most difficult question, right? I think we're getting closer to an understanding of this. So we've spoken all about this history of negotiations, and if you look at the role Russia takes each time, Ukraine wants these negotiations to be equal between the two, and Russia always tries to position itself in negotiations and then in agreements as superior to Ukraine. So in the Budapest Memorandum, it was a security guarantor, right? In Minsk, in the Minsk process, it was a mediator. So it was never really had true commitments. Ukraine would make compromises, and Russia would try to separate itself from this process and from responsibility, really. But we've reached a point where I think the aim of this American process is to involve Russia and Ukraine as equal parties in the treaty that is eventually signed with equal commitments. And Ukraine is really trying to have strong commitments, right? Not just a vague promise, but really technical details about what will happen if Russia can attack again, security guarantees, how it will all work. I think these are all lessons that Ukraine has learned very well of what's necessary. And also for Ukraine to have its own defense, not even to rely on others, and allies, European allies, and so on. Ukraine recognizes that any agreement is likely to be broken, and so to have a strong army, to be prepared for this again is very important. And I think that's the reality we're in, is there's no realistic way that Ukraine or anyone can trust that Russia will do what it promises to do, regardless of what agreement is signed. If we can dream for a moment, I think the reason this is because, as I was saying earlier, this imperialistic mindset from Russia is so strong that everything else, sanctions and exclusion from international society, the costs to the lives of Russian citizens, any costs are not as important as this aim to take control of Ukraine, and even not just Ukraine, but Georgia and other post-Soviet countries, really, even perhaps into Europe too. There's this imperialistic mindset that has to change. So I think the way to force Russia into making a compromise on paper is to push Russia into a place where it recognizes that the empire might collapse if it doesn't. That's maybe militarily on the battlefield, maybe it's economically with inflation or so on inside Russia, maybe it's politically with protests and revolution or a coup by the elites. There's something that threatens the existence of this empire, which is the most important thing, I think, to Putin and to a lot of Russians. But even then, only agreeing to a deal on paper, it doesn't prevent this happening in the future. The only way to stop it happening in the future is to dismantle this empire, this mindset, which is what happened to fascist ideologies in Germany and in Japan after the Second World War. It had to be dismantled completely. And I think the only way to prevent Russia doing what it's done, what we've spoken about for the last 30, 35 years, or actually a lot longer in the history of Russia and Ukraine, the only way to stop it is to dismantle this empire and this mindset that comes with it, which is not something that can be done at the negotiation table. Do you have anything more hopeful, any ideas of an agreement that maybe Ukraine could trust? Or do you think Ukraine has lost all trust in anything that Russia signs?
I think about consequences of following or not following this agreement. Yes, these negotiations, peace negotiations for Ukraine, is an issue of its existence. And for Russia, there are no any consequences, bad consequences, in case if it violate these agreements or will not execute this peace deal, because what are consequences for Russia? Strengthening of sanctions. It seems that Russia is not afraid. It's very much, and Putin is sure that he can continue the war, even in this case, even in the case of strengthening of sanctions or other pressure on Russia. So, and I agree with you about collapse. And I think that in these negotiations, there is no such important element as a force which Western countries can use against Russia, and which can lead Russia to military or economic collapse, because this step-by-step sanctions allows Russia to adapt to new, more hard situation, and continue to fight. That's why I think that in these negotiations we don't have this fifth element, this element which determine future Russia, future collapse of Russia, in case if Russia will not follow these agreements.
I think even more than that, I think that these agreements really are to save Russia. I think the West is scared of a Russian collapse. So, well, there's these reports of all the trade deals that may happen between Russia and America, but a key part of Russia's demands in these agreements is lifting of sanctions, integration back into the economic system, access to banking and oil sales and so on. These are really to save any pressure on the Russian regime, while at the same time a lot of pressure on the Ukrainian regime, limitations on, what alliances they can join, maybe some role for the EU, but how will it work? It's unclear. To limit language laws in Ukraine, there's lots of limitations on the politics of Ukraine demanded by Russia, but there's very few demands from the politics of Russia after the war. So these peace agreements really seem like, at the moment, they're a way for saving Russia. So when Putin recognizes that he comes close to collapse, he'll sign a deal, right? Because that deal offers to save him. And that deal offers to end sanctions, end this pressure, restart oil sales, and so on. And I think that's why these negotiations are very difficult. Because you have to offer these incentives to Russia to bring them to the table, but it doesn't solve the problem. If the problem is Russia's intentions to destroy Ukraine, it doesn't solve this problem. It moves it to 5 years or 10 years in the future. And I think, I think the West, particularly America, to some extent Europe too, is very scared to deal with this issue of Russia, of what Russia is. And it's coming closer to dealing with it, from all the responsibility and, giving Ukraine's nuclear weapons to Russia in 1994, then to being a mediator or so on. And now it's recognizing that Russia is truly the problem, but it doesn't have a solution that that would change Russia, I think. I think that's the problem with pressure, is it's not enough, and it's used as a bargaining chip. We'll put pressure on and we'll take it off when you stop fighting, and that doesn't change anything about Russia. Do you see pressure in any way help? What pressure do you think would work best on Russia?
nuclear weapon. I think that problem of west of Europe, particularly, that the first, Europe doesn't believe that Russia can lose. The second, Europe still doesn't want Russia to lose. And the third, that they are afraid of Russian invasion in other countries of Europe, and this war, Russian-Ukrainian war, allows them to exhaust Russia and to postpone this moment of Russian invasion in European Union, other countries, to postpone for some period of time, to win time to prepare to this war and to prevent this possible future war Russia against European Union and NATO countries. So they are exhausting Russia, but not let Russia to lose completely. And it also impact on these negotiations a lot. But at the same time, what these negotiations give us, yes, we receive some particular success in release prisoners, Ukrainian prisoners, maintain support of Ukraine, to balance between supporting Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia. Ukrainians want very much these negotiations to lead to peace, but if it allows us to continue this fight, it's also not very bad. And to find possibilities to take this time, to win this time for becoming stronger and find possibilities to win.
Yeah, it feels like that. I think also there is some inherent value to negotiations, of finding out truly what Russia's position is, what it might be prepared to compromise on, and what it wouldn't be prepared to. Partly to understand Russia's war aims better, and then from there, that obviously affects the military situation, as we've kind of spoken about. But also, eventually, unless Russia collapses, there will be some sort of negotiated settlement, and so negotiations are some progress towards it. Without hoping for it immediately, it's necessary at some point. So I think the point about international support is important, because especially as we get to this part of the war where there's war weariness in Europe, and trying to consider other options apart from continually funding Ukraine's defense. It's important for Ukraine to demonstrate that it's also looking for these other options. And perhaps one day something will change in Russia where they are prepared, to negotiate seriously. And so having these connections and these understandings could be useful then. But for now, I think it's largely a spectacle. It's theatre for maintaining support, for maintaining sanctions on Russia, and so on. It's not providing much value right now.
Yeah, we should look at these negotiations not as on hope, but as an instrument and leverage of achieving our purposes in this war, to try to receive as much as we can, and to try avoid bad consequences for us, to try avoid profits for Russia.
And I understand that this sounds a lot like the Russian position, right? To use negotiations as an instrument and not as a serious cause. But I think hopefully what we've tried to show from this history is that Ukraine has tried to take negotiations seriously, has tried to take them genuinely, and to make agreements. But it's learned that agreements with Russia do not mean what they write on paper. And so I think Ukraine has now learned that while it would love to compromise somehow to end this conflict, Russia offers no concessions. And in that context, you can only play the same game because Ukraine has tried to play a different game from Russia consistently, and it hasn't worked. That's the problem I think we've seen. And so, I think that's the difference. Is even though now both Russia and Ukraine are using negotiations for other purposes in some way, that has been kind of forced by 30 years of Russia playing this game and Ukraine not playing this game.
Сподіваюсь, ця розмова була для вас цікавою.
I hope you found this conversation interesting. Stay tuned. On this channel, we will discuss important events that affect the situation in the world, Europe and Ukraine.
До нових зустрічей!